When the villain has given you trouble dozens of times already, some rest is well deserved. It took 5 years for Ratchet and Clank to reappear on a Sony console after the last chapter, and even longer for the PC version to land. Yet the games are still widely celebrated by their fans. In Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart, the writers found a way to make Dr. Nefarious great again. Instead of having Ratchet and Clank simply try to prevent the bad guy from becoming supreme ruler, why not send him to an alternative timeline where he's already the undisputed emperor and have the heroes try to bring everything back to normal? It all starts by having Dingo upset because nobody recognized how important he is, how he deserves his own spin-off franchise, and how he's the best character in Crash Team Racing. Most of the discussions happening around the game are about its use of the solid-state drive for unprecedented fast loading. These kinds of flash drives have gained popularity in the last 5 years. We can debate about the size, performance, and cost over time, but long story short, we already use them in PC setups, and in a different way, in PS4s with serial ATA models, and have been taking advantage of these shorter load times. Now there is a discrepancy with the majority of games and what Insomniac Games specifically wanted to showcase by having 5 GB of bandwidth available, and it's not like developers on PS4 could have designed any game with SSD on mind, since the console has always been designed and sold with a hard drive to the public. So that's legally a system requirement. That's the standard for any random person that goes to buy a PlayStation and he's expecting it to work, possibly decently. There's also a discrepancy in how the game has been ported. With so much talk about games being optimized and dedicated for the PS5, regardless of the fact that direct storage and GPU decompression might still be a discovery land for some developers, when you wait 2 years to release a game with certain premises and then deliver this end product to fans, there's not much to understand. While a screen transition might or might not be as fast as on the PS5, you have to give props to Insomniac for being able to render scenes and put you in different environments within seconds. But at the end of the day, that's more a marketing gimmick than a gameplay statement because it's not a feature that gives you a whole different experience. You get a taste of it in some specific predetermined scenes where Ratchet jumps into a rift and appears in a different world. But for most of the game, those rifts are just a tool to get you a few extra meters across the map faster. You use them exactly like a platform character uses a grappling hook. They sold you Portal, you got Tomb Raider. As a game design choice, you travel between worlds like you would in most games, by going to a specific spot on each map. You go there, push the prompt, choose the destination from the list, and the cutscene plays. Now, did they lie in all their pre-release announcements about how this game was possibly only on PS5? Not necessarily, but they've definitely misled fans since their reference has always been the old Sony platform. Action in combat is defined by waving your wrench for melee attacks and shooting with the right trigger of the gamepad. Ratchet and Rivet share the same weaponry and the same moveset. They are really just a reskinned version of each other, and at the point that you might not be able to notice who you're playing with. Weapon selection is the biggest winning point of this franchise. The shortest way to change a weapon is by choosing in action on the fly via one of the directions on the D-pad, and you can customize these shortcuts to have your favorites or most used from the 20 weapons. Alternatively, you can also press a button to pull up an on-screen wheel with all your toys. There are so many weapons that you might have to switch between different wheels since it's not possible to have all of them selectable at the same time. Both options are useful, but keep in mind the placement of the weapons may not match the placement of your shortcuts, and you'd want to avoid to stop the action anyway. It's a decent solution considering also that you might end up with the shortcuts on the D-pad not matching the directions of the weapons in the wheel. You're gonna reload a lot, meaning the ammo will usually fall short when you need them most. Insomniac probably does this to make sure you change your weapons throughout the game and don't get too comfortable with any one combination. The game's overall difficulty is on the easy side, and other than the first half of the game where you still have to unlock some weapons and there are some hordes of enemies chasing you, the game is a breeze to finish. In the main playthrough, I replaced the blast pistol with the black hole storm toward the end of the game and immediately focused my offensive routines on power weapons like the Negatron Collider, Warmonger, Peacemaker, and Drillhound, with the Glove of Doom and Toxiary Sprinkler becoming my best friends. That's all I needed. Every encounter felt way too easy without choosing harder difficulties, which isn't necessarily a surprise because it fits the target audience of younger, less experienced players who the game has been marketed to. Most of the fun comes from the amount of polygons and explosions filling the screen when you beat a bad guy. The explosions are really exciting, very well done, and visually captivating. But in more intense combat, they cause the frame rate to drop severely, and it's all too evident, even with a top-performing PC. The high-end hardware used here doesn't force you to tinker too much with a plethora of settings available, which is nice, but it's clear that the frame rate was less consistent than it was supposed to be, and the game constantly felt unstable and unpolished. Regardless of any technicality, if Ori represents a nuanced storytelling game that could have been imported straight from a movie production studio, Ratchet & Clank is definitive proof that computer graphics productions are not something to be envied anymore. And nowadays, you can just give a gamepad to your family or your kids instead of going to the cinema or opening a video streaming service. Even better, give a mouse and keyboard, considering here you might feel uncomfortable with the degree and speed you are able to spin by using the right stick. So instead of looking for sensitivity settings, you can just change and use other controls. What's really not acceptable though is the technical state of this release. Sony products are famous for being well polished, but this game must not have gone through QA properly. Either that, or they decided to release it as is because they were afraid it would go out of style. You aren't able to copy your save file. I mean, I'm not a professional esport pro player, but I should be skilled enough to do something like this. I was not able. The first boss, he got stuck, not moving, not transitioning into the next phase. Want to go back through a rift because you thought you might have forgotten to search an area for some items? Sure, you can do it, but when you try to come back to resume your main path and keep on going, for some reason your way is blocked. A window is supposed to be open. And it was few seconds earlier, but now something's blocking you. Nothing to do other than quit and reload. Double jump has clear issues in some specific situations. I could be missing or not understanding something in this extremely basic feature, and it will be my silly fault, but when I tried to get on that platform with that barrier, it looks visibly easy and possible, but it's not. I've also been wondering why I failed at swinging so many times. What I was doing wrong that would make such a simple action constantly give me trouble. Well, it turns out that the frame per second of the game can actually alter the controls. The higher, the harder. Then you're having a boss fight, in an extremely linear setting that is, and your character hits some invisible walls, making you wonder if you're doing it right, if you did something unexpected that you were not supposed to, if you're supposed to be there or in some other place, or if it's just the way the game is. I also noticed with disappointment how right at the beginning of the game, there are small sections where, in a refined AAA platform shooter, you should be able to jump to. There are invisible walls that stop you from exploring those corners though, which ended up sending up red flags. Collision detection, flipping, floating points, an enemy shooting at you through walls, geometry problems with characters not being properly placed and detected in spots where there's a change of height in surfaces, and then the game makes you die because that's the triggered event due to lack information in the system. Sometimes, the game would completely crash during a crucial, intense moment. You are trying to sneak away from a big monster, then he spots you and you have to quickly open a sealed door and move through right before he gets you. And the game crashes. Nope, no fun allowed. Unfortunately, all of these issues are prevalent throughout the game. You don't even have to look for them. But in all honesty, in the middle of whatever technical mess this game is, it's good to point out that the game seems to save your progress and makes up for the overwhelming amount of glitches. Mostly. Except for one time where I fell and respawned in another never visited or seen area that was probably where I was supposed to go next. After any crash or problem, the game was always able to resume and put you back into the action in a seamless way. Solid stuff. Still, the moment I resumed from a crash and I got back to the latest checkpoint, it had been saved with the door already open right in front of me because the game made me skip past the thrilling hunt I was having before the software failed. This thought and those specific events confirmed a hypothesis I had growing up while I was mindlessly blasting robots and slimes and whatever. The game has been released without being properly finished. Playable? Well, it all depends on the standards one has for the gaming industry at this point. One thing nobody talked about is that looks like the game had similar problems at the PS5 release, and most reviews didn't mention everything, as always. On Steam Deck, if you rescale using excess at the Xerkees, at different times the stage will not load properly. As for the handheld device, I turned off literally everything to be able to have the highest frame rate possible and attempt to reduce the inevitable drops. This is a 3D heavy game, not exactly the Steam Deck's cup of tea. The game is the most stable at 30 or 40 FPS, but even then, you have to lower the graphics setting all the way. If you're used to running games at 60 FPS, you might as well give up now. It's not possible. The most fun experience in the game is when you ride the rails. Insomniac gives you a sort of roller coaster experience where you're constantly moving your eyes trying to catch all those great details before they disappear behind you. There is the delivery of in-engine cutscenes, some intense battles, and also those good-to-stare-at sections where you still have to play through, but ultimately, the game is average in doing its homework. You'll never find too inspired enemy patterns, and you will fight the same enemies, the same bosses many times. It's lackluster for a production team with all the resources and skills in this world to provide variety and quality. Other attempts to expand the gameplay and the experience are anything but outstanding. Glitchy sections are some mini-game that's just filler and worth to be mentioned for how they make the levels flip 180 if not more degrees. Clank's version of Lemmings are so pointless that developers decided to put an option to skip it altogether. If you skip it, they include just a pop-up where you learn about what you missed and get to keep on going. That's it. Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart is a light-hearted adventure for all ages, and you should take it for what it is from the very beginning. It's not like every game needs to have the depth of Baldur's Gate. Just like it doesn't matter if at the beginning the hero is in the midst of a broadcasted, full-fledged celebration in front of thousands of people, and a spaceship arrives to drop real monsters firing real weapons trying to kill the real Ratchet, and nobody pays attention to all the mess in the firing. You try to smile when the game makes some cheesy joke, and you keep on sending those foes up in the air. Filling a small market, it's a stopgap game, a typical mascot-featured launch title to showcase the console of the moment. It's visually appealing, marketable, and playable by everybody, especially a younger audience, providing a dozen hours of colorful and joyful run and gun. Re-released years later on a platform and at a time where it loses any of its original purpose, with a negative addition of being a problematic port that doesn't justify the rush to play it immediately or over anything else you might have sitting and waiting in your backlog.